President, by now, I think people are pretty much aware of something that happened back in about 2 weeks ago, an FCC approval of an application that was very, very significant, and yet not many people knew that it was going on. And I think, Madam President, by now it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that I oppose this decision by the Federal Communications Commission to approve an application by Ligado Networks. Ligado, its plan would use federal spectrum in a way that will interfere with GPS and satellite communications. And the FCC, despite near unanimous objection from the rest of federal government, has just said, okay. When I said near unanimous, it was near unanimous. In a letter that was received by the FCC a week before the decision was made by the FCC, they sent a letter outlining all of the reasons that everyone should be opposed to the application made by Ligado to the FCC. And their statement was Ligado's proposal is not feasible, affordable, or technically executable. It goes on to say why this would be, how destructive this would be, how the whole country uses GPS, and how this would alter the GPS system. It no longer could be used with predictability. And when I say nearly everyone, it's not nearly, it is everyone objected to it. I've never seen anything like this happen, to have something approved that was objected to by all of government. And this letter is objecting to it was signed by the Department of the Army, the Department of Navy, Department of Commerce, the NASA, Department of Interior, Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Energy, National Science Foundation, Department of Transportation, the U.S. Coast Guard, and the Federal Aviation Administration. That's everybody. I mean, I've not seen anything that it's ever had that unanimity in finding and objecting to. And for that reason, it's never been approved until the 9th. What was the date of that? April 20th, until April 20th by the Federal Communications Commission. The GPS and satellite communication functions support everything, equipment that our troops use in the field, navigation for first responders, airlines. That's how airlines keep from running into each other. They're using GPS, cell phones, ATMs, the list goes on and on. Simply put, the FCC is jeopardizing GPS signals that Americans rely on every day. You know, I chair the committee of the Senate Armed Services Committee. And when you are conducting warfare, you're using GPS. You're using GPS every day. And simply put, the FCC is jeopardizing GPS signals that we rely on, both our national and economic security, for the benefit of just one company and its hedge fund investors. Ligado may be a new name, but the problem goes back a decade when Light Squared was created in a hedge fund deal worth $5.3 billion. The investors put billions on the table, and the only way to get a return was to repurpose Light Squared's satellite spectrum for the terrestrial cell phone network. In 2011, when Light Squared asked the FCC for permission to do just that, GPS and satellite communication users strongly objected due to the interference of the GPS signal. Now, that's the problem. It's the signal is in the same area that purchase took place by a company at that time named Light Squared. Now, federal agencies like the Department of Defense, the Department of Transportation, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration echoed these concerns. In 2012, after it was clear that there was no way to mitigate the GPS interference in their proposal, LightSquared declared bankruptcy, so it was gone. Years later, LightSquared got enough new Wall Street hedge fund money to emerge from bankruptcy and be renamed Ligado, and again push for repurpose of the satellite spectrum for its network. That's exactly the thing that the predecessor company tried to do for a long period of time, and they were denied, and they were justly denied. They shouldn't have do that. There's never any idea that an application would be, by an operation like this, would be acceptable. And after extensive testing and analysis, experts at 9 federal agencies have unanimously concluded that Ligado's proposal, even with updates, will still interfere with the GPS signals and satellite communication. That's the one I just read, they're unanimously in doing this. And of course, we read the names of the individuals and the agencies that were involved. This is something that everyone agreed with. Nobody. We can't find anyone who disagreed with it, except Ligado itself, the ones who would end up with a lot of billions of dollars, and I'm not sure where it would go. Well, they relied on GPS for navigation, logistics, precision-guided missiles in training and on the battlefield. But at the end of the day, this is about much more than risking our military readiness and capabilities. Ligado's proposal will hurt the American economy. Our farmers rely on GPS to harvest their crops. Our truckers, our airlines rely on GPS to move supplies and people safely. Our maritime industry depends on GPS to place channel markings. Weather forecasting relies on satellite communication to save lives and property when tornadoes and hurricanes and floods strike our communities. I'm from Oklahoma. We know what hurricanes are. In fact, we were in our basement 2 times in one day about a month ago with those threats. That's how you determine where they are and how serious they are, and they save lives. The FCC, Federal Communications Commission, has put all this at risk by approving Ligado's application. Now, nobody thought. There wasn't a lot of opposition out there talking about it because they had not been approved for a number of years. It's never been approved before. And all of it was now at risk, just as of a week ago. Now, this is a complex issue, but here's an easy way to think about how Ligado's network would interfere with our GPS signals. Once Ligado turns its service on, it will be, this is a quote, by the way, once Ligado turns its service on, it will be like trying to hear leaves rustle over the roar of 100 jet engines. This is according to Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering, Dr. Michael Griffin, an expert in this field. Now, the FCC has included certain mitigation measures in approving Ligado's application, but these are fundamentally flawed in every practical sense. They would make Ligado the fox guarding the henhouse. How can Ligado be impartial in deciding whether its own system is causing interference? Again, it's not going to happen, and everybody knows that. And ultimately, the taxpayer and consumer will benefit, will be left to pay to fix the interference. Ultimately, the people of America would end up paying for this. Now, what I'm most upset about is the failure of the process behind this decision. A few people made a hasty decision over the weekend. Now, keep in mind, it was the middle of the national crisis. We have a national crisis. Everybody knows that's going on right now. And everyone's having to live differently than they've ever lived before. So people are concentrating on that. No one was looking. And it was against the judgment of a unanimous conclusion by the Interdepartment Radio Advisory Committee, which included 9 federal agencies as well as private sector stakeholders dependent on GPS and satellite communications. And as far as I can tell, this is the first time that the FCC made a decision over the weekend completely discounting the universal opposition to the proposal. Now, a week before this decision was made, it was universal. They decided, and this is a group, in the hearing that we had really talented people there, scientists making all the decisions, and they talked about how the decision was made over a weekend during a national crisis that we're dealing with. On a Sunday, I went back and checked, and we could not find any time a decision was made by the FCC on a Sunday or on a weekend. They don't do that on weekends. And on top of that, this was a decision that was opposed by everybody, by a letter they received a week before by a group, and everywhere it was. I mean, just look in the Wall Street Journal. The Mark Esper is the Secretary of Defense. Mark Esper has this article. They had the article there where they talked about the FCC has set conditions to ensure GPS won't be affected. Don't be fooled. It would be affected. Independent testing and analysis conducted by 9 federal departments and agencies show that allowing Ligado's proposed system, including its proposed modifications, to operate in close proximity to the GPS spectrum would cause harmful interference to millions of GPS receivers across the United States. Now, actually, the band that is used for GPS is called the L band. This gets a little bit complicated, but the L band, the area that people are concerned about and that Ligado was trying to say they are correcting was an area that was in a different band altogether. I think it's the C band and the S band. Now, as far I think this is the first time a decision has ever been made, even discounting the universal opposition to the proposal. In response to this unprecedented and unwise decision, the FCC, I'm leading a letter to the FCC outlining critical national security concerns and urging the FCC to rescind the order. And by the way, for the purpose of the presentation that I'm making right now, I do ask unanimous consent that the letter by the NTIA be made a part of the record.
Without objection.
And that the FCC article in the Wall Street Journal be made a part of the record.
Without objection.
And we can't allow this to stand. I mean, and all of America agrees. So in the last 3 weeks, stakeholders from across the country and across the economy have expressed their opposition to the FCC decision. Not just the military, but all of government in the private sector, including airlines, pilots, farmers, truckers, marine manufacturers, conservationists, equipment manufacturers and distributors, road builders, weather forecasters, and GPS device makers are opposed to Ligado's application. I know my colleagues here in the Senate have heard from all these groups representing jobs and Americans from every single state who use the GPS satellite services every day. This has happened naturally. People realize all of a sudden they found out that GPS would be affected by this. And I would ask my colleagues to consider who supports the Ligado hedge fund investors. Not one. No one is supporting it. It's my understanding from talking with people close to the FCC is that the FCC was expected to reject Ligado proposal once and for all. They had already rejected it before. It's been there. The unanimous opposition from the Interagency Review Committee was not surprising, but the final outcome was shocking. With all of this opposition, how could the FCC decide in the cover of darkness over a weekend that the unanimous concern of GPS interference was worth the risk to support the investments of hedge fund investors? I can't figure out what happened, nor can the former FCC commissioners. Why did the FCC change its course? And in such a dramatic fashion, we may never know. But we do know that Ligado has spent $1.3 billion. Put up the chart, if you would, please. $1.3 million in just 2020. That's the company that we're talking about. They have spent $1.3 million on lobbyists trying to convince Congress that their proposal is a good idea. This chart shows, there it is. There's the list of all the lobbyists. It comes up to $1.38 million. Now keep in mind, that's just for 3 months. So over a period of a year, you can multiply that by 4. Ligado is hiring whoever they can to convince you to support the hedge fund investors. And that's one of the reasons I'm talking about this today, is that there's going to be an effort, and I'm not sure what form that will take, to reverse this decision. And people have to hear from people before they realize how bad this is. And when you have this many people, you know, one of the individuals was a former chairman of the House Armed Services Committee turned lobbyist, a guy who spent his career building the military, and he should, and then obviously he is supporting, he is one of the lobbyists supporting this thing. Ligado has said this order is about winning the race for 5G and beating China. Those who claim Ligado's proposal is necessary to defeat China's 5G push are deliberately mixing up two different and important spectrum issues in order to sell their product. The share of the mid-band 5G spectrum by the DoD with industry and harmful interference of Ligado's signal with the low band, that's the L band that we're talking about, the L band that is right next to GPS, with signals that would be used in nearly every aspect of life. Ligado's spectrum that they are repurposing is not in the prime and mid-band spectrum. It's being considered for 5G. The Ligado's low-band spectrum was not a part of the FCC's own plan to accelerate 5G development released in September of 2018, called the LG Fast Plan. And I'd like to say that it's complicated, but that isn't what they did at all with this thing. Their concern was with only the L band, which is next to GPS. So reliable GPS and satellite communication is important to everyone in America who drives much of the nation's economy. We shouldn't sacrifice GPS reliability for the sake of lobbyists and hedge fund investors on Wall Street. Now, I ask my colleagues to join me in urging the FCC to withdraw its approval of Ligado's application. Instead of moving ahead with this order, we gotta reverse the order. And that's the effort that's taking place right now. If you deny Ligado's application, the same as they have done for the last 10 years, there would not be a problem today. So we have people that, with an interest in this, the hearing that we had just on the 6th of May was with the people like headed up by Dana Deasy. He's a DoD Chief of Information Officer. By the way, in the private sector, he was the CIO of 3 of the largest corporations in America. We had Dr. Michael Griffin, the Undersecretary of Research and Engineering, a retired U.S. Coast Guard Admiral, Thad Allen, who is now the NASA Space Base Positioning and Navigation and Timing Board, and General J. Raymond, the Chief of Space Operations Space Force. Now that's everyone who is really knowledgeable about this, and they're all unanimous in their opposition to this program. So I would ask that the members keep advised of the opportunities they have to reverse this decision, and we would like to have that unnecessary and actually try to get the Federal Communications Commission to do that on their own. With that, I yield the floor and